Welcome to Peace and Power Ukraine, a place to discuss all aspects of policy related to Ukraine. Ukraine sits at the crossroads of freedom and totalitarianism, where history and everything really going on in the world is happening right now. So today we are going to have a great conversation. We're going to talk about all of these important negotiations that are challenging the Trump administration, our European allies, Ukraine, Russia. And we're going to dig deeper as always. We always want to bring more light than heat. And today we're going to do that with Congressman Don Bacon. I want to tell you a little bit about him. He began his military career in 1985 when he joined the U.S. Air Force and served nearly 30 years on active duty, culminating his military career at the rank of Brigadier General. During his career in the Air Force, Don specialized in electronic warfare and intelligence. His military career highlights included 2 tours as wing commander at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany and Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue, Nebraska. In 2016, Don was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. He was named to the House Armed Services Committee in 2017, and he currently serves as subcommittee on tactical air and land forces and the subcommittee on strategic forces. Last but not least, I want to tell you he co-founded and twice chaired the 4-Country Caucus, a group of principled military veteran congressional members working together across party lines to pass thoughtful legislation related to national security and veterans affairs. We're so happy to have Congressman Don Bacon with us today. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Gary. And if I may add just one thing, I'm right now the chair of the Cyber Subcommittee in the Armed Services Committee, which I love doing. But I appreciate being on the show, and I agree with your comments right up front. We're at the crossroads, and we want Ukraine to win. We want them to be aligned with the West, democracy, and where they're in charge of their own future.
Right. Absolutely. Well, tell me, how did you get involved in this fight? Was it really a moment, like looking at the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994 and the violation of that? I know that was one of those real moments that, for me, when I began to understand what was promised there, it drew me into this fight. What was it for you?
Well, clearly the 1994 Budapest Memorandum is key because it shows that Russia committed to respecting the sovereignty of Ukraine. So did we in Great Britain. If Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapons that it inherited from the fall of the Soviet Union. But for me, it goes a lot longer and a lot deeper. I'm one of these weird kids that was in high school that liked history. I like political science, and I was studying Russia since I was a young guy. I'm a teenager, and I've sort of respected the threat that they posed as the Soviet Union, but then later as Russia. I've got to understand Ukraine is an ethnicity that wanted their freedom, but they were under the shadow of the Russians. So I guess I have that history. And I became a very active Ronald Reagan guy, peace through strength, that our role is to defend freedom, and we stand up to bullies, and we help out victims. And so you put all this together, I naturally come out of being wanting to support Ukraine because they're wanting independence. They want to go towards the West for free markets and democracy and rule of law. Russia doesn't want them to have that. And then also I served 30 years in the Air Force. I was in NATO. And so I studied the threat. I've studied Russia really my whole adult life as an intelligence guy. And so I think I just inherently know that Ukraine is on the right side of this issue and Russia's on the bad side.
Absolutely. Well, I did want to thank you up front for your service. My father, he was 30 years Army, and he put in time. My wife was 4 years in the United States Air Force, and I actually graduated high school over in Germany. Ramstein was one of our big competitors, so we fought against them real hard in a lot of sports.
Well, it was fun commanding Ramstein. I was like the mayor of 55,000, and we had to work with a lot of our NATO countries in the process. I then became deputy at 3rd Air Force. My boss was a 3-star. I was his deputy. He led all the bases. All the base commanders worked for him. And he also did missile defense in Israel, which I got to do there as well. I love Army history, but I was glad to be in the Air Force. I liked having a bunk bed when I deployed. I liked having air conditioning. And the quality of life is a little better than the Army.
Absolutely. Well, my father, who was in the Army, and my wife's father, who was in the Army, they both told her, go to the Air Force. They'll treat you a little bit better. So they had that perspective. Well, you've done so much, and your experience has taught you a lot of lessons that you've applied to this fight when it comes to Ukraine. But putting your policy hat on, we had a big moment this last week with this minerals deal being signed and bringing the United States and Ukraine into an economic partnership. So how do you view that? And then how do you think that some of the collateral effects of that might help in the strategic alliance?
Well, early on, when I heard about the rare earth minerals negotiations, it sounded from President Trump that he wanted to be paid back for the money that we've already given Ukraine, which I thought was wrong. We were giving aid, not loans. For the most part, there were some loans in there too. But frankly, again, this Ukraine's independence and being aligned with the West is our national security interest. I wasn't hearing that coming from President Trump. It was more of a transactional, what's in it for me? Well, if you give me these privileges to your rare earth minerals, we may do this. I didn't really like that tone. I criticized it. That being said, we have an agreement that Ukraine likes, that U.S. likes. And if that brings in U.S. investment into Ukraine and helps create jobs, helps create more prosperity, also signaling to the Russians when you bomb Ukraine, you're bombing an economic partner of the United States. I think that may be on the balance good.
Right.
I also think I see a change in the tone of President Trump. Ever since this agreement, he has had a different tone. Frankly, he should have always known Russia's on the evil side, wrong side, the war crime side. Ukraine's on the good side here. But I hear a tone. I hear a difference in how he's communicating since we got this agreement. I hope it lasts.
Yeah. I feel like we're sitting here today recording on the precipice of the conclave meeting in the Vatican, but it was that moment, that knee-to-knee meeting between Zelensky and President Trump that may have been a pivot point in history. We might look back at that and see it took them and nobody else, and them dealing with one another to make that deal or come to a very closer relationship and understanding with that deal. That's kind of how I'm looking at it and hopeful. Do you see it the same way?
I wanted a win-win agreement, not a win, take advantage of the weaker guy kind of agreement. But I'm not going to judge it individually. If both countries say, hey, this is a win-win, I embrace it.
Yeah, it seems like President Trump is now, we've established it's a win-win relationship, and he's now becoming more aggressive in his tone in dealing with Putin. Mm-hmm. He might realize that it's going to take more steel than just a good cop effort with, it seems like, Witkoff, that's his job. Go to Russia, show up as the good cop and try to, but it hasn't worked. It's 100 days now and it hasn't worked.
Yeah, it sure appeared that President Trump tried to be this neutral referee, trying to wrangle out an agreement between two equal parties that are at war. That's like having a moral lack of clarity with what was going on. Right. We really needed to see the truth of it as Ukraine never wanted this war. They were invaded. Heck, they came within. I was in Kyiv last September, and I was where the Russians were stopped, just 20, 30 miles outside of Kyiv, the capital.
Right.
And you go look at Bucha, where all these people were murdered. The airport where the Russian paratroopers got dropped in and had control of it for a while in Kyiv until the Ukrainians fought it back and took it back. I was on the front lines. There's a victim here and a group that are trying to defend their country because they want our way of life. And Russia says, no, they don't want a neighbor, a Slav country to have the kind of freedoms because they're probably worried that Russians will want it someday. But also it's in their nature for the Russians to want to control all their neighboring countries. There's just a problem there that those countries don't want to be controlled by Russia. They've lived through this for centuries. I mean, I go to the Baltics. I'm the Baltic security chairman. They absolutely dislike, I'll try to be nice, the Russians because they've lived under the thumb of these guys. Every family member there in the Baltics has had somebody shot or sent to Siberia during the time that the Russians occupied them. And so they know where they stand, and they know, and the Ukrainians are the same way.
Yeah, they have a perspective on history that a lot of our American audience just doesn't understand because it's not a lived experience.
Right.
A lot of the audience that we have, they've been paying attention maybe since the full scale invasion 3 years ago. Maybe if they're really involved in the issues and they've been paying attention, maybe since the invasion of Crimea in 2014. But a lot of them don't have that deep personal understanding of there's generations of experience. There's grandfathers telling sons what happened that are
Right.
then telling grandsons what happened. So yeah, that's an important perspective. I had a chance to do 3 trips to Kyiv last year, and on the last trip I was with an American delegation in December, and we were able to visit the military museum that's below the huge statue. And one of the powerful parts of that museum, they had a lot of captured Russian equipment, but what they had done is they had recreated one of the bunkers where citizens had hid during that initial invasion, and they were able to tell that story. And they also told the story of capturing and recapturing that airfield that you visited, and the bravery. And it's those stories that once you experience it, you really understand what was at play and just how close they were to losing their capital.
Right. Simon Schuster wrote this really good book on Zelensky, and I read it, but he said during this fight, he drove up to the airport, heard reports Russians were there, and he goes, "Hey, I hear the Russians are here." And these guys go, "Yeah, we're the Russians." He's actually talking to Russian soldiers at the gate of the airport. And that's how it shows you how close that was.
Yeah, some of those stories remind me of our U.S. Civil War, and thinking about, that there were folks in D.C. and there's a battle out in Manassas, and they decided, hey, we're going to go check this out. But that's how close it was in terms of, having soldiers on the gates of the fight.
And I hope they put in this museum, add to it now, the fact that 2 Su-30 fighter jets from Russia were shot down by drones.
That's a great breaking story. Explain that a little bit more to our audience. Just how historic was that from a naval standpoint?
So just this week, 2 sea drones, they had AIM-9, which are American heat-seeking missiles, and they're very good. And obviously the later versions are really good. But they were able to detect 2 Su-30 fighter jets, the top-of-the-line fighter jets to Russia, and shot them down from a sea drone with 2 AIM-9 missiles, and it's a first. And it shows you how innovative the Ukrainians are. They're innovative, they're tough, and they're fighting for their lives.
Yeah. Since we're talking combat, I want to dig into some of your combat experience briefly, so folks can understand just the nature of a ceasefire. So you've got Vladimir Putin, who's proposed a 3-day ceasefire, really to seemingly protect his military parades, to celebrate his not his victory, but Soviet Union's victory in World War II. So he's proposing a 3-day ceasefire. If you were flying sorties in Iraq and there was a ceasefire that was proposed, explain the nature of how much would have to go into the negotiations for you as a pilot to feel safe even flying missions of any type, to know you're not going to be fired upon. This is not simple to just suddenly say, oh, we're going to have a ceasefire, and everybody at all parts of this huge combat zone are going to know what to do.
The Russians announced a ceasefire during Easter and violated it within 10 minutes. And so I think if you're Ukrainian, you take it all with a grain of salt. Obviously, Putin doesn't want Moscow to be hit by drones during the middle of his parade. I would think if I was Zelensky, I would not agree to that, and I would probably launch 100, 200 drones into Moscow and let them feel a little heat there. Hey, this is war. Russia invaded Ukraine. They've murdered they've massacred people. They murdered POWs. They've raped and pillaged wherever they've been at. 20,000 Ukrainian kids are been kidnapped and dispersed. I wouldn't accommodate them here, but when they have announced ceasefires in the past, Russia has violated it in the immediate minutes of the ceasefire. So it's hard to believe it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the important thing. We had the supposed Easter ceasefire. Now we have this supposed 3-day ceasefire. They won't agree to a serious 30-day ceasefire. And I think finally the world is seeing he is not serious about peace. And no matter whether he sends Medvedev out or Lavrov to throw some propaganda out there, it's just not been serious. And no matter what he's been telling Witkoff, there hasn't been actual meat put to the bones. A real 30-day ceasefire would give all of these negotiators time to put meat on the bones and make it a reality that actually could be abided by, that everyone could see across the front, this is real and it's meaningful.
Just think, between 800,000 to 1 million Russian casualties. Putin doesn't care how many people he kills on that side. It's a meat grinder. They've always fought this way. I mean, I've looked at World War I, World War II. That they don't. Life is fairly meaningless to them, except for if they're people from Moscow or St. Petersburg, and he's worried about his hold on power. But if you live out in the hinterlands, your life is valueless.
Yeah, that was the big mistake that history tells us they made in Afghanistan. They had the mothers of Moscow receiving dead sons instead of those out in the hinterlands where, they could hide the truth of what was happening. In that invasion of Afghanistan, they lost far more than what they've lost in this Ukraine war, but it hasn't had the same impact because it's not the sons and daughters of, anyone connected into, the government apparatus or the party apparatus, what's called.
I think I know what you meant, but it came off a little different. They've lost a lot more in this fight than they have in Afghanistan.
Yes.
I think right. It came off maybe a little confusing. No, they've lost 10 or 20 times more here, maybe more than that. But you're right. The folks in Moscow and St. Petersburg aren't feeling it.
Right. So let's talk about these negotiations a little bit more. Secretary of State Rubio and others, they've been involved deeply now with the Russian regime. It would seem that if they're going to be successful eventually, they've got to recall lessons from the past. They might need to realize that these negotiators, they're still imbued with the DNA of the Soviet Union and the propaganda techniques, the negotiation techniques. I've spent time looking back at the negotiators, on the U.S. side that were in Panmunjom in Korea in 1953. They were negotiating with the Chinese communists and the North Korean communists, and it took 14 months. It took dealing with all sorts of techniques, stalling techniques, propaganda techniques. And when I began to read through that, I was, I'm starting to see some of those same things at play. And if we ever hope to get to even some sort of armistice like we had in Korea, I think it would be valuable for all of our U.S. negotiators to begin to look back at some of these historical examples.
Yeah, we're too quick to want to make a deal. We go right to the middle point. And for the Russians, that's your starting point. And they want to get in the middle of the new point. So we have not been good negotiators here. Americans want to make a deal. We aren't patient. These guys will go years if they have to, like you said. They will take it as long. And Russia, what do they want? They don't want a free, democratic, free market Ukraine. They want a Ukraine that's neutral, that's not aligned with the West, not aligned with NATO, not aligned with England, not aligned with America. They would like to have a Ukraine that has an army of 50,000, not 500,000. And that's what they're demanding. And the bottom line is Russia wants to control Ukraine's foreign policy, and if Ukrainian, none of this is acceptable. You want to be a free and independent people, and you got a taste of it the last 20 years, and you don't want to give it up. And so there's not a lot of commonality here, other than nobody likes having their sons or daughters killed. I think the Ukrainians, though, they feel like they have to because they're fighting for their lives, and the Russians, they don't care. They don't care how many people die.
Right. Yeah, they just don't have that value on life that us as Westerners, we have that in our DNA. And that's, I keep trying to make the point and help our audience understand there's still a communist DNA that's just imbued there, Putin is a KGB trained official, and that's never going to change. That's still what's in there. So tell me a little bit now about your work as cyber subcommittee chair. Do you see some tentacles from, this conflict into the cyber fight? What's active maybe below the surface that we don't understand that is happening?
Well, cyber and China are very aggressive with cyber attacks against us. Clearly, Russia's been very aggressive against Ukraine, and we are very good at what we do, but we have a lot of rules of engagement, rules of war that we abide by, and so we discussed that. Are we being too constrained in our response? I do feel like we have a lot to offer Ukraine, and I believe the prior administration was helping to some degree. I think during these negotiations, our president here has been on and off again. We should be all in. We're helping Ukraine with cyber intelligence and intelligence in general, bottom line. I also have oversight of the electronic warfare and artificial intelligence portfolios within DoD for oversight. And I got to tell you, this has been a tremendous electronic warfare fight going on here with the drones on both sides. Both sides are doing extensive amounts of jamming and trying to degrade the links that go in and out of these drones. Frankly, they're more advanced right now than what America can do. But every day they have to innovate in this drone war. And America can learn a lot from Ukraine right now. Mm-hmm. They are on the cutting edge. And we concentrate on bigger drones and bigger stuff, but they have mastered, the drone that's the size of your dining room table and ramming targets or dropping small munitions, and they're really good at it. And the Russians are starting to be candid about it. They are getting chewed up and spit out by these drones. And Ukraine is winning the war right now, or at least they've stopped the Russian attacks. And I think they have the advantage right now on the battlefield. And it's these drones that are making a difference. And it's all electronic warfare type behind it. So we can learn from it.
Yeah, it would seem like we've got this partnership in terms of minerals, this economic partnership that can be a valuable foundation for our being allies in the future. But we should also have a chance to take advantage of this great knowledge that they've had, this experience, and we should be partnering with them in all of this drone technology because it's to our benefit to learn, especially as we may need to pivot further east and deal with the Chinese. They could be a great ally in that fight as well.
Just think, Ukraine has Black Sea supremacy, and they don't even have a single Navy ship. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah. What kind of return on investment is that?
19
Absolutely
ships
incredible.
have been sunk, Russian ships. Some of them from surface on the coast to hitting the ships. Some of them, though, from sea drones that have been steered into them way out in the Black Sea, way out there where a lot of ships didn't think they were at risk. And I don't know, it's just mind-boggling what has been accomplished.
Right. Well, I before we get to our last question, I have one domestic breaking item that I have to ask a Nebraskan. It sounds like the Oracle of Omaha is finally saying, "Hey, I'm going to step back from running Berkshire Hathaway on a day-to-day basis." Any stories about Warren Buffett that you've experienced, and just all of the impact he's had, especially in your district.
At the age of 94, I think he's earned the right to step back a little bit. And he's obviously a huge personality and a man of accomplishment in Omaha. He's made a lot of millionaires in Omaha. And also, we're one of the most generous communities in the world. We have so many people that will pitch in to build a hospital, pitch in for our zoo, make our airport better. We're just blessed community because of the generosity of so many, and much of that has been fueled by Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's dad was a congressman from Omaha in the 1940s. So he's one of my predecessors. Wow. And so I've met with Warren, and he was telling me how much his dad was a hero to him. And I remember asking him, well, he was a hardcore Republican conservative. I don't think you are, Warren, so what happened? But he talked about his college days and his first wife and how he didn't think the Republican Party necessarily treated his dad fairly in the late 40s. So it's sort of interesting to hear that. You'll find that he's a very humble guy. He eats at McDonald's almost every morning. He loves Garot's, which is a steakhouse that's very modest. He's in the same house that he's lived in for decades upon decades. And I offered to name an interstate after his dad, and he didn't want me to do it because he didn't want to look ostentatious. And so I'll just tell you, he's a humble man. I think the other part that I really love about Warren is he always has these phrases that America cannot be ruled out, that I'm bullish on America. He always thinks America can overcome. We've overcome depressions, world wars. He thinks the freedom that we have makes us the most competitive country in the world, that we can overcome any challenge when we must. And I like that American exceptionalism, and Warren Buffett has it.
Yeah, they broke the mold when Warren Buffett, 94 years old. That's just absolutely incredible, and especially with all that McDonald's that he ate as well.
Right.
So let me close out with a last question. If there's one thing that you want to leave our audience that you just kick yourself if you hadn't remembered to share with us today, what might that be, Congressman Don Bacon?
Well, when it comes to Ukraine, I believe before the invasion of 2022. I was a reluctant person for NATO. Now, I was a big supporter of NATO for the Baltic countries. They probably would have already been taken over if they weren't part of NATO. But I was a little worried about putting Ukraine in NATO because I thought, why antagonize? Why? But once Russia invaded, and once they've done what they've done, and to see how Ukraine has fought, I believe Ukraine has earned the right to be considered for NATO, or at least to have a military alliance with America or Great Britain or France. It could be bilateral agreements as well. And Russia has lost all right to complain. That they squandered their right to have a voice with us.
Well, that is a great point to end on. Powerful. Congressman, thank you again for your service to our country in the military and your service now to the people of the 2nd District of Nebraska. It's been an honor to have you on Peace and Power Ukraine. And thank you all, our audience, for being with us for this important conversation. And we will see you next time.